slowly opens up the door, gets out of the car, and makes her way down the path, never looking back. Then, boom.
Steve Wells thought he was going on a calm camping trip with his wife, but instead he ran into a scary monster like Bigfoot that attacked him and took his wife. They were in the quiet Appalachian Mountains trying to take a break from the busy city, but their peaceful trip turned into a scary adventure. Steve now has to fight to get his wife back from the wild. Every second is important as he tries to save her. Before we start, it's clear that things are scarier than we thought, and there's more to shock you. Shudder and Serenity. Their adventure started off like any other camping trip. Steve, who loved photography, was excited to use his brand new color camera. He couldn't wait to take pictures of the beautiful autumn leaves and the old train tracks they had read about, tracks that had been abandoned for years. Cynthia, always supportive of Steve's hobbies, set up their camp and prepared for a relaxing night in the mountains. What they didn't know was that those forgotten tracks would soon lead them to a discovery that would change their lives forever. Before heading into the deeper parts of the wilderness, they stopped by a small local store to grab some last-minute supplies. The old shopkeeper who helped them gave them more than just directions. In a serious tone, he warned them about a creature that supposedly lived in the mountains. He said it was something like a Sasquatch, a legend in those parts. Steve and Cynthia listened politely, but they didn't think much of it. They were more excited about their trip than worried about ghost stories. Once they were at their campsite, the beauty of the untouched wilderness took over. Steve immediately set off to capture the stunning scenery with his camera, while Cynthia stayed behind to organize their tent and supplies. Everything seemed perfect at first, but then something strange happened. As Steve was off taking photos, he heard Cynthia calling his name. Her voice sounded urgent, so he rushed back, thinking something was wrong. When he got to the campsite, though, he found Cynthia sitting there, calm and confused. She hadn't called him at all. This was the first hint that their trip was going to be more unusual than they had expected. As night fell, they sat by their campfire enjoying the sounds of the forest around them. That was until they heard something odd, a distant sound that reminded them of a train moving along the tracks. Cynthia found the mystery exciting, but Steve started feeling uneasy. The strange voice earlier and now these eerie sounds left him on edge. They eventually crawled into their tent for the night, hoping for some rest. But Steve couldn't shake the weird feelings from the day. He lay awake thinking about the old man's warning and the odd events that had unfolded. Could the legends be true? The morning after their unsettling experiences, Steve woke up to find the forest covered in a thick fog. It was the kind of fog that made everything look mysterious and eerie, which seemed perfect for his photography, but it also gave him a strange feeling. Eager to capture the moody atmosphere, Steve grabbed his thermos of coffee and headed out again, following the same tracks he had explored the day before. But just as he was getting into his groove, snapping pictures, something strange happened. A voice, sounding just like his, called out for Cynthia. At first, Steve thought maybe another camper was nearby, though he knew the area had been deserted for years. But the voice was too familiar, and deep down, he realized something wasn't right. He raced back toward the campsite, a sense of urgency building with every step. When he arrived, he saw Cynthia walking slowly toward the voice, curious but unaware of the danger. Steve yelled for her to stop, telling her that the voice wasn't his. Cynthia froze, shocked by the realization. She started to wonder if the place was haunted, but instead of feeling scared, she seemed excited by the idea. That evening, they sat close to their campfire. Steve couldn't stop glancing into the fog, feeling as if something or someone was watching them. The strange noises from the night before returned, but now there was something even more unnerving. A wooden cart, which looked like it belonged on the old train tracks, appeared out of nowhere and slowly rolled toward them. It moved without anyone pushing it, stopping just a few feet away from their camp. Steve's heart pounded. He was certain they were in danger and told Cynthia they should leave immediately, but she couldn't help being fascinated by the strange sight. But this wasn't the worst part. Cynthia, against Steve's warnings, walked closer to the cart, drawn in by curiosity. She wanted to understand what was happening and believed that maybe it was some kind of supernatural event, something harmless. Steve, who was deeply unsettled, stayed close to her, hoping to protect her from whatever might be behind all this. As she got closer, the cart moved a little as if it sensed her presence. Reluctantly, Steve crouched down to get a better look. That's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was a dark figure hiding beneath the cart. Alarmed, he urged Cynthia to step back, insisting it wasn't safe. Cynthia, however, was still convinced that this was a sign from a spirit, and she asked the figure to show them something. Suddenly, a large, hairy arm shot out from under the cart and grabbed Cynthia, pulling her into the shadows. At the same time, a massive, ape-like creature emerged from the trees, throwing rocks at Steve with incredible speed. One of the rocks struck Steve, knocking him to the ground. The world went black as he lost consciousness. When Steve finally came to, he realized that Cynthia was gone. Panic surged through him. He scrambled to his feet, looking around for any sign of her, but there was nothing, just the eerie silence of the forest. The cart, now moving again, had vanished down the tracks, taking Cynthia with it. Desperate and filled with fear, Steve jumped into his truck and sped down the path, following the tracks as far as he could.
Get close to the fire! They turn on the fire!
But as the terrain became too rough for the truck, Steve was forced to continue on foot. He ran through the dense woods, calling Cynthia's name, hoping for any sign of her. The only sound that greeted him was the distant hoot of an owl, breaking the heavy silence. His heart raced as he searched through the moonlit wilderness, but the forest remained quiet, as if it had swallowed her whole. The night was just starting, and things were about to get much weirder for Steve and Cynthia. Trapped on the tracks. Cynthia slowly woke up, only to find herself face to face with a Sasquatch. The shock was too much, and she fainted again. When she finally woke up fully, she realized she was far from their camp, tied to a cart that was moving along some old tracks. Panic set in as she noticed she was lost, unsure of where she was or what was going to happen next. Memories of her Cherokee grandmother's stories about wild men in the forest flashed through her mind. She hadn't really believed those tales before, but now they felt all too real. One story about a young woman who made peace with these creatures came to mind, but in her frightened state, Cynthia couldn't remember any of the Cherokee words her grandmother had taught her. As the cart rolled on, she noticed other carts passing by, filled with apples and animal pelts. It seemed the Sasquatches had their own way of trading with each other. Eventually, they arrived at a rough-looking depot. The Sasquatches untied Cynthia and led her up a steep hill to a camp high on a cliff. They moved easily up the slope, but Cynthia was terrified as they tied her to a tree. Soon, more Sasquatches gathered around, their eyes gleaming as they prepared herbs and started a fire. The air was thick with fear, but this wasn't the worst part. Among the group were younger Sasquatches who seemed to be sizing her up, and for a moment Cynthia feared she might become their next meal. Meanwhile, Steve was still miles away, injured and barely managing to walk, trying to find help. Just when Cynthia thought all hope was lost, she remembered a few Cherokee words her grandmother had taught her, words for stop and peace. With all her strength, she shouted them out. The Sasquatches froze, looking puzzled. Then, an elder female Sasquatch with long white hair stepped forward. She seemed to be in charge, and after listening to Cynthia, she ordered the others to release her. Cynthia watched as the elder scolded the younger Sasquatches, who quickly backed away. For a moment, there was silence between Cynthia and the elder Sasquatch. Then, in a way that wasn't spoken out loud, the elder communicated to Cynthia that she was sorry for what had happened. Feeling a spark of hope, Cynthia explained that she needed to find Steve. Without hesitation, the elder gathered some herbs and led Cynthia to the edge of the cliff. Together, they descended using a simple platform, reaching the forest floor as the first light of morning began to shine. They found Steve lying on the tracks, barely conscious. The elder quickly used the herbs she had brought to help him, chanting softly and fanning him until he finally woke up. After making sure Steve could move, the elder helped them both back to the cart, which brought them safely to their truck. Before they left, the elder Sasquatch shared a surprising message with Cynthia. She revealed that she had known Cynthia's great-grandmother and had been protecting their family for generations. But that wasn't the most surprising part. The elder Sasquatch explained she was 189 years old, serving as a guardian of Cynthia's family. As Steve and Cynthia drove away, they reflected on the incredible experience. What had started as a terrifying ordeal had become a moment of deep understanding and connection. Steve, still shaken, kept the note they had been given as a reminder of the danger they had faced, and Cynthia made a promise to honor her family's history and the bond that had been revealed.
That's all there is. There isn't any more.
Cynthia knew she had to share their story, not just to warn others, but to show how peace and understanding can bridge even the greatest divides. Meanwhile, strange events began in Honobia, Oklahoma, catching everyone's attention. The Winter of the Wild. In the quiet rural town of Honobia, Oklahoma, something strange began to happen. For years, people had whispered about an unidentified creature lurking in the nearby forest, a creature that some compared to Bigfoot. But in the winter of January 2000, those whispers turned into something much more real for the people living there. This strange series of events has been the subject of many conversations and has captivated anyone interested in the unexplained, especially tales of unknown creatures. Honobia is a small place surrounded by thick woods and rugged terrain. Not many people live there, and the community is largely made up of the Choctaw Nation, who have deep ties to the area. The Choctaw people settled there after they were forced to relocate during the Trail of Tears in the 1850s. Because it's so isolated, stories of strange creatures have flourished in this part of the world. It's the kind of place where legends seem more believable because of its untouched wilderness. The story began when two brothers, Tim and Mike Humphrey, bought some land deep in the forests of Honobia. They intended to use it for hunting and as a peaceful retreat. On the property sat an old farmhouse and several other small buildings, all surrounded by dense woods. At first, everything seemed perfect for a quiet getaway, but soon enough, things took a bizarre turn. It all started with strange sounds at night. The brothers and their families began hearing loud howls and shrieks that pierced the stillness of the night. These weren't the normal sounds of animals in the woods. They were far more eerie and sent chills down the spine. Then one night, 5 deer carcasses, which had been stored in a locked shed, mysteriously disappeared. There were no signs of anyone breaking in, no tracks leading to or from the shed. The brothers were left puzzled, and soon their thoughts turned to darker, more disturbing possibilities. But this wasn't the worst part. Over the following weeks and months, things only got stranger. More animals began to disappear. The family had over 30 chickens, and one by one they vanished without a trace. The chicken coops were found empty in the mornings, yet there were no signs of any predator or thief. Despite installing lights around their property, hoping to scare away whatever was responsible, the strange occurrences didn't stop. Instead, they grew more intense. One night, there was a loud pounding on the front door, waking one of the brothers. But when he opened the door, there was no one there, only the cold wind and the dark night. The family's dogs, usually fearless, began acting strangely. They refused to go near certain parts of the woods and seemed anxious whenever they were outside. Even the children of the family started noticing odd things. They claimed to see shadowy figures at the edge of the forest. These figures didn't move but stood still, watching, almost blending in with the trees. This only added to the unease that was already hanging over the family's home. Then came the most terrifying event of all. It was a freezing night in January, and everything came to a head. The family's normally calm dog was suddenly thrown across the tree line by an unseen force. This wasn't something that could easily be explained. No person or animal they knew of could do something like that. The family was left terrified, unsure of what could have such power. In another case, a series of strange and unsettling events began with the sudden disappearance of a local woman in her 60s. She went for a walk in the woods near the Humphrey family farm and was never seen again. Despite thorough searches, the mystery of what happened to her remained unsolved. Little did the people of Honobia know this would be just the beginning of many frightening occurrences that would soon grip the town. As the winter of 1999 continued, the Humphrey family's property became the focus of some very troubling activity. Almost every night, large rocks and stones were thrown at their house, banging against the walls and roof with startling force. The constant noise and impact made it impossible for the family, especially the women and children, to feel safe. The peaceful nights they had once enjoyed were now filled with fear and anxiety. But the rocks weren't the only thing that disturbed the family. Every night, eerie noises echoed from the nearby woods. They heard strange howls, screeches, and other sounds that didn't belong to any animals they knew. These noises became a regular part of their nights, creating a growing sense of dread that hung over their home. But this wasn't the worst part. The fear escalated when the family's 3-year-old daughter had a terrifying experience. One night, she let out a blood-curdling scream, claiming to have seen a giant gorilla staring at her through her bedroom window. The sighting wasn't just a figment of her imagination. One of the mothers in the house reported seeing something similar, a large, hairy creature peeking into the house through a window. After these disturbing encounters, the family realized their home might no longer be safe. The women and children left to stay with friends in a nearby town, leaving only the men behind to guard the property. But even though some of the family members had left, the frightening events didn't stop. One afternoon, the brother's sister arrived at the farmhouse with her 2 children. Just as they were about to enter the house, 3 large, hairy, man-like creatures suddenly appeared from the bushes. Panicking, she rushed to the car and sped toward the house, with the creatures chasing after her. By the time she reached the safety of the farmhouse, she and her children were pale with fear. This was yet another alarming incident in a growing list of terrifying experiences. Not long after, the violence reached a new level. One night, one of the brothers spotted one of the creatures outside through a window. Acting on instinct, he grabbed his rifle and fired several shots at the creature as it tried to run across the yard. Even though he hit the creature multiple times, it somehow managed to stand up and run toward the woods before collapsing. The brothers cautiously went outside to see what had happened. As they approached the fallen creature, more of them appeared from the tree line, screaming loudly and throwing rocks at them. The brothers quickly retreated to the safety of their house, where they fought off the attacking creatures in a desperate shootout. But this wasn't the end of it. Throughout the night, the creatures continued their assault, throwing rocks and breaking almost every window in the house. They also tried several times to break down the doors. The family spent the entire night under siege, fending off the creatures. When dawn finally came, the creatures retreated back into the woods, leaving behind a house that was nearly destroyed and a family shaken to the core. In the aftermath, the events at the Humphrey farm drew the attention of the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, BFRO, which found the story fascinating. They approached the brothers with an offer to buy the property to conduct further research. However, the brothers were skeptical of their motives and denied agreeing to any sale of the land. As word spread about what had happened, researchers, filmmakers, and curious onlookers flocked to Honobia, eager to investigate the strange happenings. However, the Humphrey family eventually left the area, overwhelmed by the relentless fear and constant attacks. They left so quickly that they abandoned most of their belongings, choosing to disappear quietly and start fresh elsewhere. The Siege of Honobia, as it came to be known, has become a particularly gripping part of the story surrounding mysterious creatures like Bigfoot. With so many witnesses and the aggressive nature of the attacks, this story has captured the imagination of both believers and skeptics. Even today, people still debate what really happened on that remote property in Oklahoma. Were these creatures real, or is there another explanation for the terrifying events the Humphreys endured? What do you think about the possibility of such creatures existing in our world, especially in places as remote as Honobia? The mystery continues to intrigue many, and the search for answers goes on. Thanks for watching. Do you believe mysterious creatures really exist? Share your thoughts, like, comment, and subscribe for more discussions like this.